He entered Pavilion 8 and discovered the forbidden experiment. Can you believe there are places in Brazil where time has stopped and the screams still echo behind the walls? Subscribe to Aurora Hospital and activate the bell, because today's history has been erased from the records. But some swear that what happened in Pavilion 8 never stopped happening. No one knew for sure when Pavilion 8 had been built. In the old hospital's documents, he simply wasn't listed. But all the employees knew that when night fell, no one should approach that wing. The official excuse was off-limits area, but rumors said otherwise, that inside, silence carried weight, and that some patients, once taken there, they never came back. Lucas had been working as a nursing technician for a little over a year. Young and idealistic, he believed the hospital could still be a place of recovery, even surrounded by peeling walls and damp hallways. He was the kind of professional who smiled at patients and brought coffee to the early morning watchman. But in recent weeks, something began to bother him. Unregistered overnight transfers and trucks that arrived too late to be just delivering supplies. That night, the metallic sound of gurneys being pushed echoed down the main corridor. Lucas watched from afar. Two men in lab coats were pushing a gurney covered by a sheet. No patient was identified, no records, just a slight tremor beneath the fabric. One of them noticed Lucas's gaze and, without saying a word, locked the door to Pavilion 8. For a moment, Lucas considered pretending he hadn't seen it, but something inside him, a mixture of fear and curiosity, made him return after his shift. The hospital slept. The lights flickered like tired candles. He walked to the iron gate that separated the main corridor from the forgotten wing. The closed sign hung from a rusty wire. Lucas pushed it open slowly. The sound of the hinges sounded like a pent-up scream. Inside, the smell was different. It wasn't just mildew. It was something sweeter and more acidic, like old alcohol mixed with iron. On the floor, dried trails of blood led to a partially open wooden double door. He turned on the flashlight. On the walls were symbols scratched with something that looked like rust. In the corner, a stretcher covered with a sheet, the same sheet from the night before. He approached with his heart racing. When he lifted the cloth, he expected to find a body, but what he saw left him. Breathless, a humanoid mannequin made of gauze, tubes, and stitches, connected to a makeshift breathing apparatus. Beside him, medical records with names crossed out. No records in the system. No date. No attending physician. Just a red stamp. Project E.C.H.O. Lucas took a step back. The sound of a door slamming echoed in the distance, and then he heard, coming from inside one of the rooms, the most impossible sound a human being could hear, someone breathing inside the walls. Lucas left. Pavilion 8, with his body in shock. The images of the stitched mannequin haunted him like a waking nightmare. He tried to tell a co-worker what he had seen, but the reaction was immediate. A look of fear and a short sentence, "You shouldn't have gone in there, boy." In the following days, the hospital seemed to conspire against him. His access badge began to malfunction. Service orders disappeared from his desk. And whenever he asked about Pavilion 8, the head nurse would look away and simply say, "That doesn't exist anymore." But how could something not exist if it had been inside? One morning, the main generator failed. The hospital plunged into a bluish twilight. The only constant sound, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitors. Lucas took advantage of the chaos to return to the closed-off ward. This time, he found the door unlocked. The same trail of dried blood was on the floor, but something had changed. The lights were on, and in the background, voices. He hid behind a metal partition and watched. 3 men in lab coats surrounded a gurney. One held a clipboard emblazoned with the symbol E.C.H.O. The other adjusted tubes that ran down the arm of a motionless, blindfolded woman. The fluid running through the tubes was thick and yellowish. Lucas's stomach lurched when one of them said, "Subject 37, Phase 2 injection. We will record brain responses. The woman's body trembled. The veins in her neck bulged, and her breathing became a painful wheeze. One of the doctors calmly noted the signs while the other held her head. Lucas wanted to run, scream, interrupt, but terror paralyzed him. Suddenly, one of them turned towards him. "Who's there?" Lucas hid behind a curtain, his heart pounding. The doctor's voice sounded closer. "If you're the security guard, you already know what happens to anyone who comes in here." Footsteps echoed down the hallway. A flashlight beam shone through the curtain, partially illuminating his face. For a second, Lucas thought he was about to be caught, but then an alarm sounded upstairs, diverting the group's attention. They ran outside, and Lucas, trembling, approached the stretcher. The woman was still breathing, her cracked lips murmuring something inaudible. He removed the blindfold and recoiled in fright. Her eyes were completely white, as if something had drained the color out of them. She whispered, almost voiceless, "They say it's healing, but it's erasure." Before he could respond, footsteps echoed, again. Lucas ran down the hallway, through the dark wing until he found a staircase leading to the basement. There he discovered something even more disturbing: a padlocked filing cabinet and a handwritten warning. "No reading. Neurocognitive containment material." And it was at that moment, in front of that iron door, that Lucas realized that Pavilion 8 was not just a forgotten place. It was a project, and he was already inside it. Lucas stood before the iron door, panting. The sound of his heartbeat seemed louder than the wind blowing through the underground corridors. The padlock was rusty, but still sturdy. He looked around, picked up a fallen metal bar, and with 3 sure blows, broke the lock. The door opened slowly, creaking as if demanding to be awakened. On the other side, the air was heavy, humid, almost putrid. There were dust-covered iron shelves, stacks of boxes, medical records, and dozens of cassette tapes labeled with codes. Subject 12A, Subject 37B, Phase 2, a visual recording. Lucas turned on his flashlight and began leafing through the documents. Each page seemed more absurd than the last. They were reports on induced neural rewiring, traumatic memory erasure, and experimental brain stimulation in individuals with emotional disturbance. But what frightened him most was the concluding observations column. Test successful. Subject did not resist. He trembled as he read it. In one of the envelopes, he found an old, yellowed photo. 5. Doctors posed in front of a sign that read, Project E.C.H.O. Behind them, the hospital structure still under construction, but there was something strange in the image, the shadow of a 6th person, partially silhouetted, who seemed to be watching the camera from down the hallway. Lucas turned the photo over and saw, scribbled in pencil, the year 1989. Just then, he heard footsteps above, the rhythmic echo of heavy boots. He turned off the flashlight, held his breath, and stood still. The voices were muffled but clear enough to make out. The file has been opened. The perimeter has been locked down. The subject has been seen in the containment wing. Subject, he thought. Are they talking about me? Fear turned into adrenaline. Lucas gathered some documents and stuffed them inside his lab coat. He looked for an alternative exit, found a ventilation duct, and crawled through it, trying not to make a sound. Inside, the sound of his own breathing tortured him. As he emerged, back into the main hallway, the hospital felt different, as if it were watching him. The lights flickered at calculated intervals, and each flicker revealed something new. An empty gurney that hadn't been there before. A motionless shadow at the end of the hall, the distant sound of a door slamming shut. Lucas ran to the staff locker room and locked himself in. He took the papers from his pocket and began reading them in the dim light of his cell phone. One of the reports had a patient's name. On it, Marta A. D'Souza, 34 years old, hospitalized without family. In the final observation, test complete, memory completely erased, body kept under observation, Pavilion 8, room 3. His blood ran cold. Marta was the name of the woman he saw on the stretcher. She was still alive, and he realized that the erasure she mentioned could be literal. Someone was trying to erase who she was. Outside, the sound of boots was approaching. A voice shouted, "He took the files! Close the exits!" Lucas packed everything into his apron and ran to the old wing. The doors began to slam shut on their own, as if the building were breathing. Aurora Hospital once again showed its face, and in that moment, he understood what many former employees were saying. In here, what is forgotten doesn't die. It just changes its name. Lucas spent the rest of the night hiding in a disused dressing room. The hospital seemed to be back to normal, but normality never meant safety. He knew someone was looking for him, and that the voices in the hallway weren't just those of the security guards. At dawn, he decided to take it easy. He changed his uniform, left through the back entrance, and caught the first bus to the city center, carrying the reports hidden inside an old briefcase. At home, he locked the doors, turned off his cell phone, and began to sift through the material. Among the stamped sheets and recording tapes, one caught his eye. Interview Subject 12, E.C.H.O. He put the tape in, his father's old recorder, and pressed play. First, a hiss, then a female voice, weak but firm. "My name is Marta, and I remember." Lucas's eyes widened. It was the woman on the stretcher. The recording continued, as if she were speaking directly to him, decades before. "They said they would heal my mind, that they would take away the pain, the trauma. But they took everything. First came the voices, then came the forgetfulness. Memories returned in fragments, like flashes that no longer belonged to me. When I tried to tell them, they called me reluctant, and phase 2 began." The voice trembled. It was the account of someone somewhere between despair and lucidity. "If anyone finds this, know that Ward 8 is not a hospital. It's a mirror. They create new versions of us, and if you're listening, maybe you've been a part of it too." Lucas paused the tape. His throat was dry, his mind racing. He returned to the hospital that same night, unable to stay away. He needed to find Marta. He entered through the side gate, disused since the 1990s, and descended the stairs to Pavilion 8. The lights were off, but the hallway guided him as if it knew the way. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. In room 3, he found the stretcher empty. On the mattress, a single sheet, "She remembers you." Lucas felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "From me?" he thought. He took the flashlight and illuminated the corner of the room. There was Marta, standing motionless, with her head partially shaved and fresh scars on her arms. "You came back," she said, her tone almost calm. "They said you wouldn't remember." He recoiled. "From what?" She smiled slightly. "Of what you did to me." The silence that followed was more painful than any scream. Marta approached, her eyes still colorless, and held out something in her hand, an old, yellowed photograph. In the image, a group of doctors and nurses next to the E.C.H.O. project sign. Among them, Lucas. He dropped the photo. The air seemed to compress inside the room. Memories came to me in flashes, surgical gloves, syringes, commanding voices, a signature on a chart, technical manager El Noguera. Your own name. "They erased you too," whispered Marta. "But forgetting is not a cure." The lights flickered, and the distant sound of metallic footsteps began to approach. Lucas understood too late. The experiment was not over. He era the experiment. Lucas stood paralyzed in front of the photograph. His hands trembled, his eyes searching for some rational explanation, but nothing made sense. In the picture he looked older, maybe 15 years older, wearing a lab coat with the hospital crest and a doctor's badge. Dr. Lucas Nogueira, experimental neuropsychiatry. But he had never been a doctor, at least didn't remember it having been. Marta approached slowly, her voice cracked with an old pain. "You said I would heal, that the pain would go away. But they erased me, and they erased you too." He shook his head, trying to deny it, but memories began to bleed through the corners of his mind. Tiny images, smells, sounds, the cold light of the operating room, the sound of machine-controlled breathing, and the sound of a voice, his own, saying, "E.C.H.O. procedure final phase, initiating cortical reconnection." Lucas's body shuddered. The memories came in waves, painful, as if each one burned away a piece of his sanity. He saw faces, tied-up patients, and the same stitched-up mannequin from the beginning. But now he understood that artificial body was a test, a prototype of something bigger. The E.C.H.O. project sought transfer human memories to a new host, erasing traumas and rewriting identities. And he, Lucas, was the first to achieve this, but also the first to pay the price. In the hallway, the metallic sound of boots returned. Marta grabbed his arm. "They're coming for you, to finish what they started." "Who are they?" he asked, desperate. She smiled wearily. "The same ones who promised me a cure." Lucas ran down the hallway, carrying the reports and the photo with him. The hospital seemed alive. The lights flickered on as he passed, as if the building were breathing in sync with fear. As he turned the corner, he found an antique mirror hanging crooked on the wall. Instinctively he looked, but the reflection he saw was not his own. It was the face of an older man, with sunken eyes and scars identical to Marta's. He touched the mirror, and the reflection smiled back. High-pitched sound began to echo in his head, like interference. Images overlapped, the laboratory, the experiments, the screams, the voices saying, "Reconnect, preserve, re-record." And among them, a phrase repeated dozens of times, "Identity is the first symptom to be replaced." Lucas fell to his knees, his breath short. From across the corridor, two figures in lab coats appeared. One of them held a clipboard and said something to the other. Subject 01 responded to the reminder. "The implant was successful, so he thinks he's a nursing technician. Yes, and he started remembering. We need to reset before it all comes back." Lucas tried to run, but his legs wouldn't respond. The vision began to blur. The voices sounded increasingly distant. Marta screamed his name, but he no longer knew if it was Lucas, if it was a doctor, or if it was just another body recycled by the project. When he collapsed to the floor, the last thing he saw was a red mark glowing on the ceiling. E.C.H.O, Human Continuity Program. And then everything went dark. The first sound Lucas heard was the slow drip of water falling from the ceiling. The second, the sound of his own breathing, ragged, irregular, as if he were breathing for another body. He opened his eyes slowly. The ceiling was too white, the light too intense. He tried to move, but his arms were tied. A strong smell of disinfectant and burnt iron reminded him where he was. The hospital. Always the hospital. A figure approached, blurred by the brightness. "Calm down, Doctor," said a soft, almost maternal female voice. "The reconfiguration was successful. You are safe now." Lucas tried to answer, but his dry throat wouldn't let him. The woman touched his forehead, and he realized there were wires attached to his scalp. "We need you to rest, Doctor. Your memories are adjusting." "Doctor?" The word echoed inside him like a stone thrown into a well. He tried to remember who he was, but the memories came back. Broken, fragmented, mixing faces he didn't recognize, repeated phrases and voices in constant echo. Suddenly, he heard distant screams, familiar screams. He turned his face towards the sound and saw, through the frosted glass, a female silhouette being restrained by two security guards. "He remembers!" the voice shouted. "You can't erase it again!" It was Marta, Viva, screaming for him. Lucas struggled against his bonds, pulling at the cables, tearing at his skin, until he managed to free himself. He staggered to his feet, his eyes streaming with light and blood, and stalked out into the hallway. The hospital looked different, as if it had been rebuilt. The walls were new, but the shadows were the same. At the end of the hallway, a sign glowed in neon. Aurora Research Center, Neurocognitive Division. With every step he took, a metallic sound echoed under the floor. The lights flickered, revealing figures for milliseconds, faceless patients, doctors watching through circular windows, silhouettes in absolute silence. Lucas staggered, trying to distinguish reality from delirium. At the end of the corridor, a mirror awaited him again. But this time, the reflection wasn't his. Era Marta, looking back. "You woke up, Lucas," the image said, moving its lips before him, "but you shouldn't have woken up." He stepped closer, his heart racing. "Where am I?" "Where you've always been," the voice answered through the glass. "Inside." The surface of the mirror began to ripple as if it were made of water, and suddenly he saw flashes of surgeries, faces that were his and weren't, replicated bodies, memories copied like computer files. Project E.C.H.O. didn't erase minds, duplicated. Each time a patient was cured, a new version of him was created, and the old ones were kept in Pavilion 8. Lucas recoiled, terrified. The lights flashed, and an alarm echoed. From the speaker, a robotic voice announced, "Subject 01 detected outside containment. Reboot in 60 seconds." He started running. Behind him, doors locked themselves. The hospital vibrated as if it had a pulse. In the reflection of the windows, he saw different versions of himself, each with blank stares, each trying to get out the other side. And as he ran, a certainty was born within him. He wasn't the first Lucas to try to escape, just the latest. The hallway seemed endless. Each door Lucas left behind closed on its own with a metallic click that sounded like a sentence. He ran without, knowing where he was going, guided only by his survival instinct, or perhaps by the fear of falling asleep again. Behind him, the voice from the loudspeaker repeated in a calm, almost hypnotic tone, "Reboot session in progress. Cooperate, Doctor. Cooperate." He entered a side room and locked the door. It was an old laboratory, covered in dust and the smell of burning ozone. In the center, a row of transparent capsules, aligned like vertical tombs. Inside each one, a sleeping person, identical to himself. There were at least six versions of Luke, each one with a label on the chest, El Noguera, Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3, until Phase 6. His stomach churned. At the foot of the capsules, a monitor flashed with the phrase, "Subject 07, active, brain synchronization in progress." He walked closer, and one of the screens displayed images projected directly from his mind, memories he had believed were his own, but which now seemed staged, manipulated, edited like scenes from a movie. The death of his father, choosing a profession, the first day in the hospital. All of this was repeated, with slight variations in each version of the video. The same script, the same cycle, rewritten infinite times. Lucas screamed, punching the glass of the capsule until his fists bled. From inside, one of the copies opened its eyes. Empty eyes, colorless, soulless. And in an inaudible whisper, he murmured something that made the world spin. "You are the mistake." The sound of Footsteps echoed behind him. Marta entered with the same serenity of someone who has already gone through madness. "I tried to warn you," he said, approaching the capsules. "They don't want to kill you, Lucas. They want to reboot you. You're the only one who remembers." "Remember what?" She looked up at the ceiling, as if talking to something above them. "That Aurora Hospital has never treated anyone. It manufactures versions. Pavilion 8 is a memory factory. Every patient who enters here is a copy of someone who once existed." Lucas stepped back, feeling his mind fragment. The lights flickered, and for an instant he saw all versions of himself opening their eyes at the same time. The sound of hundreds of synchronized breaths filled the room. The glass began to vibrate. "They're waking up," Marta said, tears in her eyes. "And when they wake up, you will cease to exist." Lucas grabbed her hand and tried to run away, but the door locked. The alarm went off. The entire hospital seemed to come to life, walls pulsing, cables moving like veins, and a deep voice echoing through the speakers. "E.C.H.O. project complete. Consciousness reintegration initiated." The copies started to break the glass from the inside. Lucas screamed. Marta pushed him against the wall, desperate. "Corey!" "Where to?" "Inside!" She opened a panel behind the gurney, revealing an iron staircase that led down to a tunnel. Lucas hesitated, but the sound of shattering glass made him jump. As he descended, he heard the sharp crack of the capsules breaking apart, and the unison chorus of identical voices saying, "Wake up, Doctor!" The tunnel ended in a circular room, cold and dark. In the center, a single stretcher. About her, a body with your face. But this time the eyes were open. The body on the stretcher breathed slowly, its chest rising and falling steadily. Lucas approached, dazed, his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. The cold light enveloped them like an eternal interrogation. That face, his own face, seemed more serene, almost at peace. He touched the copy's shoulder, and its eyes snapped open. "You're back," said the other Lucas in a tone too calm. "It's about time." Lucas stepped back, unable to speak. "Who are you?" "I am what is left. The last E.C.H.O. All others have failed." The double stood up, pulling threads from his body casually. "They tried to reboot us dozens of times, each version more obedient than the last. But you," he smiled, "you still resist the programming." The real Lucas felt short of breath. "So none of this is real? The hospital, Marta, the project?" The other approached, his gaze fixed and empty. "Reality is only what the system keeps active. When one version fails, another is loaded. Aurora Hospital is not a place. It is a cycle. We are the cycle." The ceiling vibrated. A deep sound filled the room, like a heartbeat within the walls. Marta appeared at the entrance of the tunnel, panting, covered in blood. "They are coming. The choice has to be made now." Lucas looked from one to the other, not understanding. "Choice? One of you needs to end the cycle. If both of you remain conscious, the system resets, and it all starts again." The double looked at her, silent. "He'll never make it," he said, pointing at Lucas. "He still thinks he's human." Lucas felt despair rise in his throat. "I am human," he shouted, but his voice echoed with a metallic tone, as if it came from far away. Suddenly the siren stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. On the panel in the background, the message flashed. "Time out. Hard reset in 10 seconds." Marta ran to Lucas and held his face. "If you are still you, prove it. End the cycle." He looked at the other. The perfect copy, the same face, the same fear, and understood. Without thinking, he grabbed one of the loose cables and plunged it into the double's chest. The body fell, convulsing, as the lights flashed like lightning. The whole hospital seemed to scream. Lucas collapsed, exhausted. The panel changed the message. Reboot aborted. Manual process detected. Marta helped him get up. For a moment, everything was silent. But then the system's voice came back, soft, almost caring. "Congratulations, Doctor. Phase 7 has begun." He looked around, confused. Walls began to move. The ceiling closed in. Marta tried to pull him out, but his body began to stiffen. The skin cracked into small, bright lines. And before he could scream, everything went black. When the screen came back on, the sound was the same as always. Footsteps, voices, the jingling of keys. A group of nurses pushed a stretcher down the corridor. Above her, a new patient with a blank look and slow breathing. The tag on his arm read, El Noguera, Subject 08, Admission 10-12-2025. And behind the door of Pavilion 8, a familiar voice whispered, "Welcome back, Doctor."